What does a man who can buy anything do when he finds the one thing he lost? For Nathaniel Sterling, a name synonymous with untouchable wealth, the answer was not simple. He could acquire companies with a single phone call shift, global markets with a whisper, but he couldn't erase the past. And one rainy Tuesday night, in the most unlikely of places, his past walked up to his table holding a notepad, wearing a worn-out apron, and asked for his order. He saw the ghost of a girl he once knew, and the comfortable fortress of his billion-dollar life began to crumble. What he did next wasn't about charity. It was about a debt he never knew he owed. The rain fell on the panoramic windows of Nathaniel Sterling's penthouse, each droplet a tiny, insignificant percussionist in the grand symphony of New York City. Below, the city lights blurred into a glittering tapestry, a kingdom he had by all accounts conquered. At 32, his company Apex Dynamics was a titan of logistics and predictive analytics, a digital leviathan with tentacles in every corner of the global supply chain. His face, etched with a permanent look of intense calculation, had graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. He lived a life of curated perfection, from his Swiss watch, which didn't just tell time but tracked astronomical cycles, to the minimalist art on his walls, each piece an investment worth more than the average American home. Tonight, however, was an anomaly. His usual haunt, a Michelin-starred establishment, where the chef knew his preference for seared scallops without being told, was closed for a private event. His driver, a stoic man named Arthur, had suggested an alternative. A place that was gaining traction online for its authentic Italian cuisine, a small, unassuming restaurant called The Gilded Spoon, tucked away in a quieter part of Greenwich Village. The name was a quaint irony that wasn't lost on Nathaniel. His own spoons were solid silver. The interior was cozy, a world away from the cold, expansive spaces he usually inhabited. The air was thick with the scent of garlic, oregano, and something warm and welcoming like baking bread. It was crowded, noisy. Families laughed. Couples leaned in close, sharing secrets over plates of pasta. For a moment, Nathaniel felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. He was seated at a small table near the back, the fabric of his custom-tailored Zegna suit feeling stiff and out of place against the rustic wooden chair. He was scrolling through market projections on his phone, his mind 1,000 miles away, when a shadow fell over his table. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The voice. It was soft, with a faint melodic quality that sliced through the restaurant's din and snagged on a thread of a long-forgotten memory. He looked up, his automatic corporate pleasant response dying on his lips. Standing before him was a woman in a simple black uniform, a white apron tied around her waist. Her hair, a cascade of honey-blonde waves, was pulled back in a messy but practical ponytail. A few stray strands framed a face that was etched with a quiet weariness. Yet it was a face he knew as well as his own reflection from another lifetime. The wide, intelligent eyes, the color of moss after a storm. The faint dimple that appeared on her left cheek when she offered a polite professional smile. Her name tag read Belle, but he knew her as Isabel. Isabel Vance. The world tilted on its axis. The clatter of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. His mind raced back 15 years to the hallways of Northgate Preparatory Academy. He wasn't Nathaniel Sterling, the tech mogul, then. He was just Nate, a gangly, socially awkward scholarship kid with glasses held together by tape and a brain that worked faster than his mouth. He'd spent his lunches in the library coding on a clunky laptop invisible to the social elite. Isabel Vance, however, was anything but invisible. She was the sun around which their small school world orbited. She was the lead in the school play, the editor of the literary magazine, an artist whose charcoal sketches won state awards. She wasn't just popular, she was kind. While others in her clique would snicker at his worn-out shoes, Isabel had once stopped by his library table, genuinely curious about the lines of code on his screen. She'd talked to him not as a charity case but as a peer. She'd complimented a short story he'd anonymously submitted to the magazine. For a lonely, brilliant boy, that small act of grace was everything. He had harbored a colossal silent crush on her, a secret he guarded more fiercely than his most complex algorithms. And now here she was, the golden girl, the one destined for a life of art and acclaim, asking him if he wanted sparkling or still water. The name tag, Belle, felt like a cruel abbreviation, a stripping away of the vibrant person he remembered. The light in her eyes was still there, but it was muted, overshadowed by a fatigue that ran bone deep. He could see the faint lines of stress around her mouth, the slight redness on her knuckles, likely from washing dishes or carrying heavy trays. "Sir," she asked again, her smile faltering slightly at his stunned silence. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. The awkward boy was gone, replaced by a man in a suit that cost more than her car. He had traded glasses for laser eye surgery, and the nervous energy had been hammered into a steely, impenetrable confidence. To her, he was just another customer, another table to turn. "Nathaniel," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Her brow furrowed in polite confusion. "I'm sorry." "My name," he clarified, feeling a flush of heat creep up his neck. "It's Nathaniel Sterling. We went to school together. Northgate Prep." Isabel's eyes widened. She took a half-step back, her gaze sweeping over him, really seeing him for the first time. The professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of shock, then confusion, and then something he couldn't quite read. It might have been embarrassment. Her hand instinctively went to her apron, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle. "Nate," she whispered, the name a ghost from another era. "Nate Sterling. Wow, I didn't recognize you." "It's been a while," he said, the understatement of the century. "You look—" He stopped himself before saying good, because that felt like a lie. She looked tired. She looked like life had been unkind to her. "It's good to see you, Isabel." Her smile was brittle now. "It's just Belle here," she corrected gently, gesturing to her name tag. The distinction was a wall she was putting up between the past and the present. "The world's a small place, I guess. Well, what can I get for you, Nate?" The use of his old name felt like a deliberate attempt to regain control of the situation, to put them back on some kind of equal footing, even though the chasm between them was now an unbridgeable canyon of wealth and circumstance. He ordered the first thing he saw on the menu, his mind reeling. Isabel Vance, a waitress. How was this possible? What series of catastrophic events had led the most promising girl of their generation to this noisy, ordinary restaurant on a rainy Tuesday night? As she walked away, her posture straight and proud, despite the worn thin soles of her shoes, a fierce, protective, and deeply unsettling feeling took root in Nathaniel's chest. He had the power to change worlds, and he was damn well going to change hers. But as he watched her move through the restaurant with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years of doing this job, a chilling thought occurred to him. What if she didn't want him to? Nathaniel ate his meal on autopilot. The lasagna, which probably was genuinely authentic and delicious, tasted like ash in his mouth. His thoughts were a chaotic storm of memories and questions. He watched Isabel from across the room, a knot tightening in his stomach with every plate she cleared, every polite smile she offered to a demanding customer. He saw her wince as she lifted a heavy bus tub. He saw her mask of cheerful professionalism slip for a fraction of a second when she thought no one was looking, revealing a profound exhaustion. This wasn't a temporary gig between art gallery shows. This felt like survival. His first instinct, the one honed by years of solving problems with capital, was simple: throw money at it. Erase this reality for her. He could hire her, give her an absurdly high-paying consultant position at his company. He could set up a trust fund. He could buy this entire restaurant and fire her only to hand her the deed. The possibilities were as vast as his bank account. When she returned with his check, the professional smile was firmly back in place, but her eyes avoided his. The awkwardness of their shared history hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Will that be all for you tonight, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, the formal address a clear signal. He was a customer. She was the waitress. The chasm was to be respected. "Nathaniel, please," he said softly. And yes, thank you. The food was excellent. She gave a curt nod, her focus on the small black folder containing the bill. I'll take that whenever you're ready. He placed his Centurion card, the infamous black card, inside. As she walked away to run it, he made a decision. It was clumsy, ostentatious, and deeply impersonal, but it was the only language he was fluent in anymore. On the tip line of the receipt, he paused. The bill was for $48. He wrote in a tip of $10,000. He scribbled a hasty note on the back. Isabel, a new start. You deserve it. Nate. He felt a pang of something that might have been shame at the crudeness of the gesture, but he pushed it down. It was efficient. It was a solution. He left the restaurant without waiting for her to see it, stepping back out into the rain, where Arthur waited with the door of his Bentley open, a silent, waiting cocoon of luxury. The next day, Nathaniel's focus was shattered. He sat in a boardroom overlooking Central Park, surrounded by his executive team, but their discussion of quarterly earnings and market penetration strategies was just white noise. He kept picturing Isabel's face, imagining the moment she saw the receipt. Would she be relieved? Grateful? Would she cry? He hoped they were tears of joy. He was jolted from his reverie by his executive assistant, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Genevieve. Sir, the board is waiting for your input on the Singapore acquisition. Postpone it, Nathaniel said abruptly, standing up. The entire room fell silent, stunned. Nathaniel Sterling never postponed anything. Something's come up. He retreated to his office, the silence of the vast minimalist space a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Just as he was about to call his private banker to see if the tip had been processed, Genevieve entered holding a small, plain white envelope. This was just delivered by a courier for you, sir, she said, her expression carefully neutral. The courier said it was of the utmost urgency. Nathaniel took the envelope. It had his name written on the front in elegant, familiar cursive. He knew that handwriting. He'd seen it on the top of essays that received perfect marks on posters for the school play. It was Isabel's. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check for $10,000 made out to him, and underneath it, a single piece of paper, a receipt from the Gilded Spoon, his receipt. His grand gesture returned. Pinned to the check was a small note written on a torn piece of notepad paper. The message was short, the letters pressed hard into the page. Nathaniel, I am not a project. I am not a charity case. And I am certainly not one of your acquisitions. I appreciate the sentiment, I suppose, but I cannot accept this. My life is my own, and so are my problems. Please don't do this again. Isabel. The words were a physical blow. He felt like the awkward, invisible boy at Northgate all over again, completely misreading a social situation. He had tried to solve her life with a number a transaction, and in doing so, he had insulted the very core of who she was. The pride and resilience he'd admired from afar were the very things he had just trampled on with his casual, arrogant wealth. He had seen a problem to be fixed, but she had seen an act of pity. And she was right. He sank into his leather chair, the check feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He had offered her a lifeline, and she had thrown it back in his face, choosing to tread water in a stormy sea rather than be pulled aboard his luxury yacht. He had miscalculated spectacularly. Money wasn't the answer. It had been a wall he'd hidden behind for so long that he'd forgotten how to connect with someone without it. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his security team, a file he'd requested late last night after getting into his car. He had asked for a discreet preliminary background check on Isabel Vance. He hadn't wanted to pry, but he needed to understand. Now faced with her fierce rejection, the need felt more urgent than ever. He opened the encrypted file. The details were sparse but grim. Isabel had been a scholarship student at the Rhode Island School of Design RISD, a top-tier art school. She'd dropped out in her second year. A few months later, her father, Robert Vance, had passed away. There were records of extensive medical bills linked to a rare, aggressive form of cancer. The family home in Westchester had been sold to cover the debts. Her mother, Laura Vance, was currently living in a small apartment in Queens with Isabel and her younger brother, who was still in high school. There was a note about Mrs. Vance's own health issues, something chronic that required ongoing care. The final entry hit him like a punch to the gut. It detailed her father's business, Vance Innovations, a small, promising tech startup specializing in supply chain logistics. The company had declared bankruptcy just months before his death, following the loss of a key patent in a legal dispute. Supply chain logistics. The name of the company tickled the edge of his memory, a faint dissonant chord in the symphony of his own success. He had built his empire in that exact space. He leaned forward, his mind racing, a cold, creeping dread beginning to snake its way around his heart. He needed more information. This was no longer just about helping an old school friend. This was about something much, much deeper. 2 days of silence passed. Nathaniel didn't try to contact Isabel. Her message had been unequivocal. The return check sat on his desk, a stark white monument to his own ineptitude. He felt adrift, the usual certainty that governed his life having evaporated completely. He had approached the problem like a CEO, but Isabel Vance wasn't a failing subsidiary to be restructured. She was a person, and he had failed to see her. He realized the core of his mistake. He had acted from his world, the penthouse suite, the boardroom. To connect with her, he had to leave it. He had to meet her on her own terms in her world. He had to be Nate again, not Nathaniel Sterling. It was a risk. She might slam the door in his face, literally or figuratively. But the thought of leaving things as they were with her, thinking of him as some arrogant billionaire playing savior, was unbearable. And the nagging detail about her father's company, Vance Innovations, wouldn't leave him alone. He found out her schedule from the restaurant's website. She worked the dinner shift. He guessed she probably spent her days taking care of her mother or trying to find other work. On Thursday morning, armed with nothing but a hope and a profound sense of humility, he took a yellow cab to the address in Queens his security team had found. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, clothing that felt foreign on his skin. He left his watch in the car. The apartment building was a 6-story brick structure, clean but weathered by decades of city life. He buzzed the apartment number listed for Vance. A moment later, a female voice, not Isabel's, crackled through the intercom. "Hello?" "Hi, my name is Nate Sterling. I'm an old friend of Isabel's from school. Is she available?" He held his breath. There was a long pause. "She's not here right now. She's at the park." "The park?" "Astoria Park," the voice clarified. "By the river. She goes there to draw." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance." He said the name, feeling respectful and right. The speaker clicked off. He found her on a bench overlooking the East River, with the Triborough Bridge stretching majestically in the background. She had a large sketch pad resting on her knees and a piece of charcoal in her hand. She was so absorbed in her work, her brow furrowed in concentration, that she didn't notice him approach. Her focus was absolute, a world away from the harried waitress he'd seen. Here she wasn't Belle. She was Isabel, the artist. He watched from a distance for a few minutes, admiring the way her hand moved across the paper, swift and certain. She wasn't sketching the bridge or the skyline. She was drawing an elderly man sitting on a nearby bench feeding pigeons, capturing the gentle slump of his shoulders and the kindness in his expression with a few masterful strokes. Finally, he cleared his throat gently. "That's incredible." Isabel jumped, her head snapping up. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a flash of defensiveness crossing her face. She immediately closed her sketchbook. "What are you doing here, Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice sharp. "How did you find me?" "Your mother told me," he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "And it's Nate, please. I'm not here as Nathaniel Sterling. I'm here to apologize." She eyed him with suspicion, her body tense. "There's nothing to apologize for. You got your money back. We're even." "No, we're not," he insisted, taking a tentative step closer. "What I did was arrogant and insulting. It was a crude, impersonal gesture, and I'm deeply sorry. I wasn't thinking about you, Isabel. I was thinking about myself, about how I could fix a situation that made me uncomfortable. It was selfish. And I'm sorry." His sincerity seemed to disarm her slightly. The hard line of her jaw softened. She looked away, out at the river. "Apology accepted. Now if you'll excuse me, I was busy." "I know. I saw," he said. "You're still brilliant. I remember a charcoal drawing you did of the school's clock tower that won first place in the state art fair. It was amazing. You made old brick look like it had a soul." The specific memory caught her off guard. A genuine surprised smile touched her lips for the first time. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said, and the words were truer than he intended. An awkward silence fell between them. He decided to take another risk. "Look, I know my last offer was a disaster, but I want to make another one, a real one. I saw your drawing. I know your talent. My office? It's a sterile glass box. It needs a soul. I want to commission a piece of art from you, a large-scale painting for my main lobby. Name your price. A real professional commission. Artist to client. No pity, no charity. A business transaction." Isabel stared at him, her expression unreadable. He could see the conflict in her eyes. The artist in her starved for an opportunity was at war with the proud woman who refused to accept a handout. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this, Nate?" "Because," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "I believe great talent shouldn't be serving lukewarm pasta to people who don't appreciate it. And because that kid in the library who you were kind to all those years ago never forgot it." She was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to decipher a complex code. He let her. He had laid his cards on the table. No tricks, no corporate maneuvers. Just a simple, honest request. "I don't have a studio," she said finally, the statement both a fact and a test. "You can use my penthouse," he offered immediately. "It's mostly empty space and has incredible light. We can set up a space for you there. No strings attached. I'd need materials, canvases, oils. They're expensive. My company will provide a budget for materials separate from your commission fee. Standard practice." He had thought this through. He was treating it like any other corporate art commission. She bit her lip, her gaze dropping back to her closed sketchbook. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head. It was a real chance, a lifeline that wasn't a handout, but a hand up. It was a way for her to earn money doing what she loved, what she was born to do. "Okay," she said, her voice small but firm. "Okay, Nate, I'll do it." A wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy washed over Nathaniel. This was the right way. Not a grand gesture, but a quiet collaboration. A bridge built not of money, but of mutual respect for her talent. "There's one more thing," he said, his tone turning more serious. The memory of the file on his computer surfaced again. "At the restaurant, you mentioned your father. I was so sorry to hear about his passing. The file I read mentioned his company, Vance Innovations. It was in logistics, right?" Isabel nodded, a shadow passing over her face at the mention of her father. "Yes, it was his dream. He was a brilliant engineer. He designed a new kind of inventory management system. It was going to revolutionize everything." "What happened?" Nathaniel asked, trying to keep his voice casual. A bitter look entered her eyes. "The big fish ate the little fish. A larger corporation initiated a hostile patent dispute. They claimed his core algorithm infringed on one of their dormant patents. We couldn't afford the legal battle. The lawsuit bankrupted us. It broke his heart. 6 months later, the cancer came." Nathaniel felt a cold dread solidify in his gut. The pieces were starting to connect in a way that made him feel physically ill. "Do you remember the name of the corporation that sued him?" he asked, his voice tighter than he wanted. Isabel looked at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes at his intensity. "I think so. It was some generic aggressive name. Something like Thorn Consolidated." "Why?" "Thorn." The name hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Harrison Thorn, his old rival from Northgate. The one person who despised him as much as he despised Isabel. and now a ruthless competitor in the tech world. A man whose venture capital firm had funded several of Apex Dynamics' key early acquisitions. A horrifying, sickening suspicion began to bloom in the darkness of his mind. He had built his empire by acquiring smaller, innovative companies. He had a team for that, a whole division. He rarely looked at the gritty details of every deal, especially in the early days. He just saw the potential, the technology, and the bottom line. What if the foundation of his entire life, his entire success, was built on the rubble of hers? The arrangement began with a professional distance that felt both necessary and fragile. Isabel arrived at Nathaniel's penthouse the following Monday. He had kept his promise, clearing out a large section of the sprawling living area that overlooked the city. An easel, a set of premium oil paints, and a large gallery-quality canvas stood waiting. Genevieve had handled the procurement with her usual efficiency, but the gesture was all Nathaniel's. Isabel was businesslike, her guard firmly up. She surveyed the space, her artist's eye assessing the light, the angles. "This will work, Guy," she said, her tone clipped. She refused his offer of coffee, pulling a thermos from her own bag. The message was clear: she was here to work, not to socialize. Nathaniel respected the boundary. He retreated to his home office, a glass-walled room at the other end of the penthouse, and tried to focus on the endless stream of data and decisions that constituted his life. But it was impossible. He was acutely aware of her presence, of the soft scrape of a palette knife, the faint, pleasant smell of turpentine that now perfumed his sanitized air. From his desk he could see her reflection in the glass. She worked with a fierce, all-consuming intensity. The weary waitress from the Gilded Spoon was gone, replaced by a confident creator. She moved with purpose, mixing colors with an alchemist's precision, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She was transforming the blank canvas, and in doing so she was transforming the entire atmosphere of his home, infusing it with a life and creative energy it had never known. After a few days of this silent cohabitation, the ice began to thaw slowly. It started with small things. He'd leave a bottle of water on the table for her. She'd leave a small preliminary charcoal sketch of a new idea for him to see. One afternoon he found the courage to walk out of his office and observe her work up close. "It's abstract," he said, stating the obvious. The canvas was a swirl of deep blues, sharp silvers, and a vibrant, almost violent slash of crimson. She didn't look up from her palette. "It's the city," she explained. "Not the postcard version, the real one. The energy, the data streams, the loneliness, the ambition. The silver is the steel and the glass. The blue is the melancholy of the river at dusk. And the red, that's the heartbeat, the blood of it all." He was mesmerized. She wasn't just painting a picture. She was interpreting his world, the very world of data and ambition he lived in, and showing it back to him in a language he had never considered. "I've never thought of it that way." "Most people don't," she said, finally looking at him. A small smile played on her lips. "They see the buildings, not the pulse." These conversations became more frequent. He learned about her life in fragments. He learned her mother Laura was a former literature professor whose multiple sclerosis had progressed, requiring more and more care. He learned her younger brother Sam was a bright kid with a knack for computers, a fact that made Nathaniel's heart ache with a strange irony. He learned that every dollar Isabel earned at the restaurant went toward her mother's medical expenses and Sam's future. She spoke of her father with a mixture of profound love and deep unresolved anger at the injustice that had been done to him. "He poured his soul into Vance Innovations," she told him one rainy afternoon, dabbing at the canvas. "He believed technology should help people connect them, make things more efficient so they had more time to be human. He wasn't a shark like those other guys." The comment landed like a stone in Nathaniel's gut. Those other guys. Was he one of them? He had always told himself he was a builder, an innovator. But at what cost? Meanwhile, his own investigation was proceeding in the background, a dark undercurrent to the tentative friendship blooming in the light-filled penthouse. He hadn't delegated this task. This was too personal. Late at night, after Isabel had packed up her things and taken the subway back to Queens, Nathaniel would sit in his silent office digging through the digital archives of Apex Dynamics' earliest acquisitions. The name Thorne Consolidated appeared frequently. Harrison Thorne's venture capital firm had been an early and aggressive partner. They had a reputation for flipping distressed assets, buying struggling companies or valuable patents for pennies on the dollar and selling them for a massive profit. It was a brutal but legal business practice. He finally found what he was looking for in a heavily compressed file from over a decade ago related to the acquisition of a small tech firm called Logicor. It was this acquisition that had provided Apex with the foundational algorithm for its now famous Pathfinder predictive logistics software. It was the bedrock of his empire. He scrolled through the due diligence documents, his eyes scanning pages of legal and financial jargon, and then he saw it. A single line item in a list of intellectual property assets acquired from Logicor. Patent 7-894-23B Predictive Inventory Flow System. The original filer of the patent was not Logicor. It was a company they had acquired it from just 3 months prior, a company called Vance Innovations. The air left Nathaniel's lungs. It was all there laid out in black and white. Thorne Consolidated had initiated a patent infringement lawsuit against Vance Innovations, knowing full well the smaller company couldn't sustain a legal fight. They had bled Robert Vance dry, forced him to sell his patent for a fraction of its worth to their shell company Logicor to settle the suit. Then Thorne, through Logicor, had turned around and sold that very same patent bundled with other assets to a young, hungry, and ambitious Nathaniel Sterling for a tenfold profit. Nathaniel felt sick. He was not just a passive beneficiary of Isabel's tragedy. He was the direct primary beneficiary. The very algorithm that had made him a billionaire, the one he had built his entire company on, was her father's stolen legacy. The heartbeat of his own company was predicated on the stopping of Robert Vance's. He looked out from his office at the half-finished canvas. Isabel had started adding flecks of gold to the painting, to represent the moments of connection, the unexpected beauty. She had told him. He was the fraud in the masterpiece. His entire life, his success, the very money he was using to pay her for this commission was tainted. It was the fruit of a poisoned tree. And Harrison Thorne had handed him the basket. The question of what to do was no longer a simple matter of helping an old friend. It was now a question of justice, of redemption. But what would that even look like? Exposing the truth would mean admitting his empire was built on a lie. It could trigger shareholder lawsuits, a stock market collapse, the ruin of everything he had built. It would destroy his name, his reputation. And worse, much worse, he would have to tell Isabel. He would have to look into the eyes of the woman who was just beginning to trust him again, and confess that he was the faceless shark who had profited from her family's destruction. He had bought her father's soul for a bargain and used it to build his kingdom. The realization was a crushing weight far heavier than any billion-dollar fortune. The revelation settled over Nathaniel like a shroud. The air in his penthouse, once filled with the promising scent of turpentine and potential, now felt thick with deceit. Every time he looked at Isabel, so focused and alive as she worked on the canvas, a wave of guilt so profound it was physically nauseating washed over him. He was a ghost at his own feast, haunted by the truth buried deep in his company's archives. He couldn't confront her. Not yet. To do so without irrefutable proof, without a plan, would be a confession without absolution. It would just be a cruel act shattering the fragile peace she had found. He needed more than just a decade-old digital file. He needed to understand the how and the why. He needed to face the architect of this ruin, Harrison Thorne. Getting a meeting with Harrison was surprisingly easy. Their companies, while competitors, often moved in the same rarefied circles of finance and technology. Nathaniel instructed Genevieve to arrange a dinner, citing a potential strategic partnership as a pretext. Harrison, ever the opportunist, agreed immediately. They met at a restaurant that was the antithesis of the Gilded Spoon. It was a sleek, modernist establishment in a skyscraper where the plates were oversized, the portions were minuscule, and the bill would be astronomical. The ambiance was one of cold, hard power. Harrison Thorne had changed little since their days at Northgate. He still had the same predatory smile and eyes that seemed to assess everyone for their value or vulnerability. He had exchanged the prep school blazer for a ridiculously expensive Italian suit, but the air of entitled arrogance was identical. "Sterling," Harrison greeted him, shaking his hand with a grip that was meant to convey dominance. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Thinking of buying me out, or are you finally ready to admit Apex needs my firm's M&A genius?" "Just catching up, Thorne," Nathaniel replied, his voice a calm, level mask for the storm raging inside him. "It's been a long time." They made small talk through the first course, a verbal sparring match of veiled boasts about market share, recent acquisitions, and personal extravagances. Nathaniel played his part, letting Harrison preen all the while studying the man who had so callously destroyed a family for profit. Finally, over the main course, Nathaniel made his move. He leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. "I was looking through some of our company's foundational acquisitions the other day. Nostalgia, you know. Remembering the early days." "Ah, yes, the hustle," Harrison said with a smirk. "We did some great work together. Your vision, my firm's aggressive growth strategies. We made a formidable team." "We did," Nathaniel agreed. "I was looking at the Logicor deal specifically. The patents we acquired in that package were game changers, especially one of them, a little thing called the Predictive Inventory Flow System." He watched Harrison's face carefully. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something recognition caution crossed his features before being replaced by his usual smug mask. "Ancient history, Sterling. I can barely remember the deals I made last month," Harrison said, taking a sip of wine. "We bought and sold dozens of small tech patents back then. It was a volume business." "This one was special, though," Nathaniel pressed, keeping his tone light conversational. "It was originally filed by a man named Robert Vance. Company was Vance Innovations. Ring any bells?" Harrison placed his fork down. The pretense of casual dinner conversation was over. His eyes narrowed. "The name sounds vaguely familiar. A failed startup, I imagine. The landscape is littered with them." "Failed is one word for it," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening, losing its friendly edge. "Bankrupted by a lawsuit is more accurate. A patent infringement suit filed by Thorne Consolidated." A slow, cold smile spread across Harrison's face. The smile of a man who has just been caught but feels no shame, only amusement. "You have been doing your homework. I'm impressed. I always knew you were meticulous. But why the sudden interest in the historical minutiae of corporate litigation?" "Because the daughter of Robert Vance is currently in my apartment painting a mural," Nathaniel said, letting the words hang in the air. Harrison actually laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "Well, isn't that a poetic little tragedy, the sins of the father visiting the— what is she now, a starving artist? Perfect. I hope you're paying her well, with her father's money in a sense." The sheer, unadulterated malevolence of the statement struck Nathaniel dumb for a moment. There was no remorse, no attempt to deny or obfuscate, only pride. "It was one of my finest plays," Harrison continued, leaning forward as if sharing a trade secret. "Vance was a brilliant fool. He created a diamond, but had no idea how to protect it. We saw the value. We found a dormant, vaguely related patent in our portfolio, hired a legion of lawyers to create the illusion of infringement, and buried him in paperwork and legal fees he could never hope to pay. He practically gave us the patent just to make the bleeding stop. And then we sold it to you, the wonderkin Nate Sterling, who was too busy changing the world to look too closely at the tools you were using." He took another sip of wine, his eyes glittering with triumph. "Business is a hunt, Sterling. You don't feel sorry for the gazelle, you just eat it. That patent made you a billionaire. It made me a 100-millionaire. I'd say Robert Vance's legacy did quite well for itself, wouldn't you?" Nathaniel felt a cold, clean rage settle over him. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of his youth, but something far more dangerous. It was a focused, calculated fury. All the pieces were now in place. He had the what, the how, and now, straight from the devil's mouth, the why, pure, unadulterated greed. "You do realize," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously quiet, That I have records of all of this. The original legal threats from your firm, the patent transfer documents to the shell company, our own acquisition records. A good forensic accounting team could lay this out for the SEC in a single afternoon. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. And what would that accomplish? It was a decade ago. It was all technically legal if ethically flexible. You'd be implicating yourself. Apex Dynamics, knowingly or unknowingly, it doesn't matter which, profited from predatory practices. Your stock would plummet. Your shareholders would revolt. You'd be tearing down your own house just to prove the foundations were rotten. You're a pragmatist, Sterling. You're not a crusader. You won't do it. Harrison believed he had him trapped. And on a purely logical financial level, he was right. To reveal this truth would be an act of corporate self-immolation. But Harrison was miscalculating. He was seeing Nathaniel Sterling, the CEO. He wasn't seeing the boy from the library who still remembered an act of kindness. He wasn't seeing the man who watched a brilliant artist come back to life every day in his living room. Nathaniel stood up, throwing his napkin on the table. The meal was over. "You've always underestimated me, Harrison," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You see the world as a hunt, but you forget one thing. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted." He walked out of the restaurant, leaving Harrison Thorne sitting alone with his expensive wine and his confident, cruel smile. But Nathaniel knew with chilling certainty that he had just wiped that smile off Harrison's face for good. The only question now was how to proceed. He had the ammunition to destroy Thorne, but first he had to face the fallout from the bomb that was about to go off in his own life. He had to go home and tell Isabel the truth. Returning to the penthouse felt like walking into a courtroom where he was both defendant and executioner. The lights were low, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Isabel was gone for the day, but her presence was everywhere. Her easel stood like a silent sentinel in the living room, the canvas now a vibrant, complex masterpiece nearly complete. Her faint scent of oil paints and charcoal hung in the air. The space felt more like a home than it ever had before, and he was about to burn it to the ground. He knew he couldn't tell her like this, ambushing her when she arrived in the morning ready to work. This conversation required a different setting. It required courage he wasn't sure he possessed. He sent her a simple text message. "Isabel, can we meet tonight? Not at the apartment. There's something important we need to talk about. The Gilded Spoon, 9 p.m. after your shift." He chose the restaurant deliberately. It was where this new chapter had begun, a place that represented her world, not his. It felt right to confess his sins on her turf. Her reply came minutes later. "Is everything okay? We'll talk then," he wrote back, unable to lie and say that it was. The hours leading up to their meeting were the longest of his life. He paced the length of his apartment, the city lights below mocking him with their indifferent brilliance. He rehearsed the words in his head 1,000 times, but every version sounded hollow, inadequate. "I'm sorry my entire success story is the sequel to your family's tragedy. By the way, the man who destroyed your father was my business partner, and I'm the one who cashed in." When he arrived at the Gilded Spoon, it was closing. The boisterous energy was gone, replaced by the quiet sounds of staff cleaning up. Isabel was sitting at the same table where he had first seen her, her waitress uniform replaced by the simple jeans and sweater she wore to his apartment. She looked tired from her shift, but her eyes were alert, filled with a nervous curiosity. He sat down opposite her. The air was thick with unspoken questions. "You look terrified, Nate," she said, her voice soft. "What's going on? Is it about the painting? Do you hate it?" "No," he said quickly, his voice hoarse. "God, no. The painting is... It's magnificent. It's the only honest thing in my apartment. This is about something else. This is about your father." Her posture stiffened. A protective shield seemed to snap into place over her features. "What about my father?" He took a deep breath, the confession he'd rehearsed dissolving into raw, painful truth. "I've been looking into what happened to his company, Isabel, to Vance Innovations." "Why?" "Because the name sounded familiar, and because what you told me. It didn't sit right," he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. You told me he was ruined by a lawsuit from a company called Thorne Consolidated. Yes, she said, her voice wary. What about it? The man who owns Thorne Consolidated is named Harrison Thorne. Nathaniel continued, each word a heavy stone he was forced to lift. We went to Northgate together. He was and is my biggest rival. But in the early days of my company, Apex Dynamics, his venture capital firm, was also one of my primary investors. He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes give way to dawning horror. She was connecting the dots, following the trail of poison he was laying out for her. His firm had a business model. They would find promising small companies with valuable patents. Companies like your father's. They would use predatory legal tactics to bankrupt them and acquire their intellectual property for nothing. Then, they would sell those patents to larger growing companies. Companies like mine. He paused, his heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vice. Isabel. The core patent that Apex Dynamics was built on the algorithm that made my fortune. It was your father's. Thorne took it from him and sold it to me. My success, the foundation of everything I have, it came from the destruction of your family. Silence. It was a deafening absolute silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Isabel stared at him, her face ashen. The color drained from her cheeks, and her eyes, those beautiful expressive eyes, became wide with shock, and a pain so deep it stole his breath. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply shattered right there in front of him. You knew. She finally whispered, her voice a broken, fragile thing. All this time. The commission. The kindness. Was it all just guilt? A guilty conscience trying to pay off a debt. No, he said desperately, leaning forward. No, I swear I didn't know until a few days ago. I was just a kid so focused on building my company, I never looked at the fine print of where the technology came from. I trusted Thorne. I only found out when I started digging after we reconnected. I swear to you, Isabel. She shook her head slowly, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. It doesn't matter when you found out, Nate. It's the truth, isn't it? The money you paid me with for that painting. It's my father's money. The apartment I worked in is a palace built on his stolen dreams. Everything is a lie. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her movements were stiff, robotic. I feel sick. I have to go. Isabel, wait, he pleaded, standing as well. We can fix this. I can fix this. Fix this, she repeated, her voice rising with a hysterical edge that bordered on a laugh. How can you fix my father's death? How can you fix the years I've spent scrubbing tables and watching my mother get sicker because we couldn't afford better care? You can't undo this with your checkbook, Nathaniel. Some things can't be fixed. She looked at him one last time, and what he saw in her eyes was worse than anger. It was a look of utter betrayal, of disillusionment so complete it was like a void. The trust they had painstakingly built over the past few weeks had been annihilated. To her, he was no longer Nate, the kind boy from the library. He was the man who lived in the castle her father's bones had built. She turned and walked out of the restaurant, disappearing into the dark, rain-slicked New York night. Nathaniel stood alone amidst the upturned chairs and empty tables. The silence of the room a roaring testament to his failure. He had finally told the truth, but in doing so, he had lost the one thing that his billions could never buy back her. The confrontation with Thorne had been a battle of wits and power. This was a devastation of the soul. He had made his choice. He had chosen the truth. And now he had to live with the consequences. The days that followed Isabel's departure were a hollow echo. Nathaniel existed in the penthouse, but the soul of the place had left with her. Her magnificent painting stood as a vibrant, painful testament to what he had broken. His calls went to voicemail, his texts unanswered. The silence was a judgment forcing him to confront the man he had become. Harrison Thorne was right. On paper, exposing the truth was corporate suicide. But as Nathaniel stared at the canvas, at the swirl of ambition, connection, and heartbeat, He knew his company was not the most important thing to him. Not anymore. A week later, he called a press conference. He didn't consult his board or his lawyers. This wasn't about mitigation, but about demolition and rebuilding. Standing before a horde of reporters, he laid it all out with brutal honesty. He detailed the predatory practices of Thorne Consolidated and explained how Apex Dynamics had profited from the destruction of a small family-run company called Vance Innovations. He named Robert Vance, calling him a brilliant innovator whose legacy had been stolen. "You cannot build something true on a rotten foundation," Nathaniel said, his voice resonating through the stunned room. "And so today we begin to make it right." He announced 2 actions. First, a massive civil lawsuit against Harrison Thorne for corporate fraud. Second, the formation of the Vance Foundation for Ethical Innovation, which he was personally seeding with $5 billion of his own stock. Its mission would be to provide legal support to small inventors and to offer grants to aspiring artists. The foundation's first official act, he concluded, his gaze finding a camera as if he could speak directly to her, will be to establish the Robert Vance Grant for an artist of extraordinary talent and integrity. The fallout was immediate. Apex stock tumbled, the board was apoplectic, and the business world was in an uproar. But amidst the chaos, a different story emerged, one of accountability, of a billionaire who chose integrity over profit. He didn't know if Isabel had seen it. Then a week later, a manila envelope arrived at his office. Inside was a single key and a note on a simple card. "Nate, the painting is not complete. My mother's medical bills have been paid. Sam's college fund has been established. I know this was you trying to fix things with your checkbook again. You are a clumsy, infuriating, and honorable man. The Vance Foundation reached out to me. They offered me the inaugural grant. I accepted. I think my father would have liked that. The key is to my new art studio in Brooklyn. Come see me. Let's finish the painting together. Isabel." Nathaniel Sterling held the key, its cool metal a tangible link to a future he thought he had lost. His fortune was diminished, and his company in turmoil. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt rich. He walked out of his office, leaving the chaos behind, and headed for a small art studio in Brooklyn to help finish a masterpiece. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of loss, revelation, and redemption. Nathaniel and Isabel's story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or bank accounts, but in the courage to face the truth and the integrity to make things right no matter the cost. It shows that a single act of kindness from the past can echo through a lifetime, and that even the most broken foundations can be rebuilt with honesty and sacrifice. Their future won't be a simple fairy tale, but a real challenging and beautiful path they now walk together. If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Nathaniel's difficult choice. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will shock you and stay with you long after the story ends.